yeah, I will give a little quick overview of the system, and then I would love to like invite folks up here and then maybe do a couple of questions so that you can like see it. So this system is like one of those ones that you can buy online. I've seen home worm composting systems go for anywhere from $60 to people spend $300 on them. All of that seems really unnecessary for me. So when I was getting into this, I was like, oh, I'm going to DIY and I'm just going to drill some holes in a storage tote. I got really lucky and told this to a friend, and they had this sitting in a garage because I've got the best friends, and they were like, oh yeah, no, we had this. We're just not going to use it right now. Do you want to borrow this and start this out without having to DIY? So I got to benefit from their fancy system. But it really is so easy to do your own, because you just drill holes in the bottom of a tote and then you're done. If you want to, you can get like a $5 or $10 spigot from the hardware store and put it into the side so it can drain off any liquid that's there. But other than that, I swear it's just a plastic bin. In here, I use recycled paper, so newspaper scraps, as you can see, scraps from Trader Joe's shopping bags, and then cardboard boxes. I mean, you can also use like egg cartons that are brown paper, your drink trays, like anything that you get shipped. I just tear like any plastic shipping labels or whatever off, but then shred it. Stephanie has been kindly and so patiently shredding bedding for this next part of the demonstration, where we're gonna like put some other, we're gonna bury some food waste and add another layer to this worm bin right here. The fun thing about this, so we've got, this is kind of like a tower system. The bottom of it is totally non-porous, there's not holes, but then each of these individual trays, there are, it's like a grid, there's holes, and the worms can move throughout the different sections. And it allows the worms to move vertically up and down to process different layers. It also means that I can have more surface area in production at a time without it, like, I tuck this literally next to the bookshelf in my office. Like, I keep this inside my house, also because I know that if I put it outside or in the garage, I'm gonna forget that it's there and I'm never gonna touch it again. Or it'll be 6 months from now and my worms will all be dead. And that's okay, but it's, you'll have like a full bin of worm castings, but you'll have no worms left if you do that, which is a totally viable option for this too. So for me, I take the system, I touch it probably once every 1 to 3 weeks. I save up my kitchen scraps in bags, and I generally put them in my freezer. So I just pulled like this little bit out of my freezer this morning. I tend to weigh it just because I have a notebook and I like to keep track of like, oh, here's how much food I added to this part of the worm bin. And I take some little observational notes on how the worms are doing each time I do it. But it's really simple. I just have a kitchen scale, weigh it. And then when you put it in, you put in the food waste underneath a section of the bedding. And then you add additional dry material. So like most composting and the demonstrations that Mitchell has done before, you know, it's always a balance of green material that's a little bit more organic, that's a little bit more nitrogen rich. So those are going to be things like your vegetable scraps from your kitchen, any plant leaves that were just like recently alive, right? But then it's something that's totally like brown sticks, leaves, mulch, dirt, manure. All of those things can be viable worm bedding, including cardboard and recycled paper. But you're going to want to have a balance of those things for 2 reasons, right? You're going to want to balance like carbon and nitrogen in here to make sure that it's not getting too acidic in your worm bed. That's not great for worms. And you're going to want to balance it so that it's not too moist. Worms like when it's like moist, when it's damp, you know, you find them in the parts of the soil where it's not totally dry. If it's totally dry, they're not going to love it. It's going to like leach the moisture out of their bodies and kill them because they don't have like a whole little exoskeleton, right? Like they need it to be moist, but they need it to not be drowning, right? Because their whole bodies are in this substance. It needs to be a little bit moist, but not in totally damp or totally saturated, which is also why it's really important for these drainage holes to exist. Yeah. The best part about worm bins is that you can kind of play worm god in a not creepy way, or maybe it is for you, I don't know. But it's it's one of those things where you get to determine how frequently you feed the bin. You get to determine how frequently you harvest castings and worms. And so the more that you put into this process, the faster it's going to turn around, right? But also the faster that your worm population is going to grow. So if you think back to earlier science lessons, right, in elementary or middle school or high school, when you think about like limiting factors in an ecosystem, the limiting factor could be space, right? If you get too many worms in here, they're not going to have enough space to thrive, right? And you might need to either separate out your colony or they're going to start dying off, right? Like there's just not going to be enough space for them in terms of resources. And also worms are allergic to their own poop, which is a very funny mechanism of worms, especially since they're crawling in it. But you need to have, yeah, they'll balance themselves out in terms of ecosystem. But I was just chatting with you earlier and we were talking about you can harvest worms for if you're a fisher, right? If you're somebody who likes to fish and you want to do that, or somebody in your family is, you can harvest worms to use as bait. And that's one way to limit the size of your population, right? So as you get more and more worms, sorting through them. Yeah, there's really great worm sorting videos online. One of the methods is literally like dump everything out, and like they're afraid of sunlight, right? So you just kind of like put them in the bright sun and start scraping things off of it, and the worms will crawl like lower and lower, and as you scrape off the dirt from the top, the worms will be, you'll be left with a pile of worms at the bottom of that. And so that's one of the ways to do it. Or you can just hand sort, which is tedious. There's also really cool like sifting mechanisms online that you can buy for relatively inexpensive. Yeah, mostly this process is like, there's a lot of great material online, and I cannot highly enough recommend this book, Worms Eat My Garbage by Mary Applehoff and Joanne Olszewski. It is so accessible, it is so plainly written, and it is like step by step on just so many different things that it was a really great resource for me, and it made me feel like I had enough knowledge to do this and that the stakes were low if I was going to mess up. So that's the fun part to me. Yeah, cool. I'd love to invite folks now to come up and see the worm bin and then ask questions. Cool. The end.
You can help contribute year-round by becoming a Walls Project Insider. Your reoccurring monthly donation will help fund projects like this, as well as the many other programs hosted by the Walls Project. Learn more about these projects by visiting thewallsproject.org.